In this video, we're going to relive one of the most terrifying moments a sailor can face. 50-foot waves crashing over the deck while rounding the legendary Cape Horn. But this isn't just a tale of brute force and survival. What happened next shocked even the most seasoned sailors and left a lasting lesson for anyone who dares to challenge the Southern Ocean. Through this real-life account, we'll break down what went wrong, what was done right, and the critical decisions that spelled the difference between life and death. From storm tactics and equipment failures to the raw human instinct to survive, this story has it all, and it's packed with takeaways that every sailor should know. We'll also highlight the key safety practices that could have changed the outcome and might save your life if you ever find yourself in a similar nightmare. Whether you're preparing for offshore cruising or simply fascinated by the extremes of ocean sailing, this video is your front row seat to one of the ocean's harshest tests. So, batten down the hatches, grab a warm drink, and stay with us till the end, because what you're about to see is more than a story. It's a wake-up call, and trust us, you won't want to miss it. The wind howled like a wounded beast when the first 50-foot wave struck the Resilience. Michael Harrington, tethered to the cockpit by a safety harness, felt the impact shake every inch of the steel sailboat. Icy water flooded the deck, sweeping away anything not securely lashed. For a terrifying moment, the boat heeled to 70 degrees, nearly vertical on the wave's face. "Hold on, old friend," Michael muttered to the boat, his calloused hands gripping the helm with superhuman strength. At 58, with 3 decades of sailing experience, he knew Cape Horn forgave no mistakes. It wasn't for nothing that sailors called this place the Everest of sailing. As the Resilience fought to right itself, Michael caught a glimpse of Cape Horn's dark cliff through the mist, a 425-meter monster rising from the turbulent waters where the Pacific and Atlantic collide in eternal fury. It was less than 5 nautical miles away. "We're almost there, Dad," he whispered, touching the small locket around his neck containing his father's ashes. Almost there. 6 weeks earlier, Michael was docked in Puerto Williams, Chile, the southernmost town in the world, and the last outpost before the frozen void of the South. The Resilience, his Mason 44 steel-hulled sailboat, was being prepped for the most formidable challenge a sailor could face. Preparations had begun months earlier in Boston, when Michael decided it was time to fulfill the promise made to his father. He had spent weeks studying accounts of sailors who survived the Cape Horn passage, absorbing every technical detail, every piece of advice. He consulted meteorologists, cartographers, and shipbuilders. The Mason 44 was already a sturdy boat, but Michael knew it would need substantial modifications to face the extreme southern conditions. The 5-millimeter steel hull had been meticulously inspected and reinforced at critical points. The ketch rig, with 2 masts, the main taller than the mizzen, offered crucial versatility for variable conditions. Michael had installed a redundant steering system with duplicate cables and pulleys, plus an emergency rudder. Hatches and portholes received extra seals, and the doghouse was reinforced to withstand the impact of giant waves. Now, in Puerto Williams, he was making final adjustments, checking every system 3 times, testing every backup, anticipating every possible failure. His inventory of spare parts seemed excessive to some, but Michael knew that at Cape Horn, redundancy wasn't a luxury. It was survival. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" asked Elena, the local meteorologist who provided forecasts for the few adventurers crazy enough to challenge Cape Horn. The reports show a series of low-pressure systems forming in the Pacific. "It's going to get ugly out there." Elena wasn't just a meteorologist. She was a veteran of the region, having witnessed dozens of attempts to round the Horn. Her eyes had seen many confident sailors depart, only to return defeated or not return at all. Michael nodded as he meticulously checked his spare parts inventory. "I've got a 48-hour window before the first system hits. If I set sail at dawn tomorrow, I can reach the Drake before things get worse." He unfolded a weather chart on the navigation table. The low-pressure systems were clearly visible, spiral smudges moving inexorably eastward. Between them, a narrow band of relatively stable conditions, his window of opportunity. Elena frowned, her dark eyes studying the stubborn American. The Drake isn't a lake, even on the best days. The Furious 50s don't take days. Off the Furious 50s, the latitude band between 50 degrees and 60 degrees south, where constant winds circle the globe without large land masses to slow them. Here, winds rarely dropped below 30 knots and often exceeded 60. Combined with complex ocean currents and irregular underwater topography, they created some of the planet's most dangerous sailing conditions. Michael smiled, but his eyes betrayed the tension he felt. The Resilience was built for this: 5mm steel hull, long keel, catch rig for versatility. I reinforced the doghouse, installed a redundant steering system, and have brand new storm sails. He didn't mention the sleepless nights, the nightmares of giant waves swallowing his boat, the fear he tried to ignore. He didn't mention the doubts that plagued him when he was alone, questioning whether, at 58, with a body still recovering from cancer treatment, he had the physical stamina needed. "Hardware isn't everything," Elena replied, pointing to her temple. "It's here that the battle is won or lost." She was right, of course. Michael knew that better than anyone. His father, Thomas Harrington, had been an exceptional sailor with almost supernatural instincts for reading the sea and sky. "The ocean speaks to us," he used to say. The question is, are we listening? That night, alone in the cockpit under the southern sky, Michael opened his father's weathered journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded in places, but the words still carried the strength of Thomas's voice. He flipped to the entry he was looking for, the last one his father wrote before illness confined him to a hospital bed. "Cape Horn remains my unfulfilled dream," Thomas had written, in a trembling hand. "It's not just the physical challenge that draws me, but what it represents. The ultimate test for a sailor, a place where there are no shortcuts, where man and boat are reduced to their purest essence." Thomas Harrington had been a respected sailor, but never fulfilled his dream of rounding Cape Horn. Cancer took him too soon. "I'll complete your journey, Dad," Michael promised the stars. He himself had faced cancer 5 years earlier. The disease forced him to abandon his career as a naval engineer and reconsider what truly mattered. His marriage didn't survive the ordeal, and his son, now grown, rarely called. The diagnosis had been a cruel reminder. Time was finite, and some promises needed to be kept while there was still time. Michael closed the journal and checked his safety gear again. The thermal survival suit, capable of extending life in 4-degree waters for up to 6 hours. The EPIRB, emergency position indicating radio beacon, which would send his precise location to rescue services in an emergency. The self-inflating life raft, secured in a special deck compartment. The flare gun, the flares, the advanced medical kit gear he hoped never to use, but whose absence could mean the difference between life and death. The next morning, with the first touch of light on the horizon, Michael cast off. The Resilience's auxiliary diesel engine, a meticulously maintained 54-horsepower Yanmar, purred smoothly as he maneuvered out of the sheltered harbor. Some local fishermen waved, their weathered faces showing a mix of respect and concern. They knew the sea Michael was about to face. An old, gray-bearded fisherman made the sign of the cross as the Resilience passed. Michael nodded in acknowledgement, not a religious man, but at sea, all blessings were welcome. Once in open water, Michael shut off the engine and raised the sails. The process was a familiar dance. First the mainsail, adjusted to catch the wind most efficiently. Then the Genoa, the large triangular foresail, unfurled carefully to avoid jamming. The fresh northwest wind filled the high-strength Dacron fabric, and the Resilience responded immediately, heeling slightly as it gained speed. Michael felt the familiar rush of freedom, that always came when the wind took over. The boat sliced through the water at 6 knots, a comfortable pace that would conserve fuel for when it was truly needed. His plan was to sail through the Beagle Channel to the open ocean, then head southeast until sighting Cape Horn, if all went well. He would complete the circumnavigation of the Cape and return to Puerto Williams in a week. The Beagle Channel offered relatively calm passage for the first few hours. The towering mountains of Tierra del Fuego rose on both sides, their snow-capped peaks reflecting the rising sun. Occasionally, Michael spotted small groups of penguins swimming near the shore or albatrosses gliding majestically overhead, but he didn't let the surrounding beauty distract him. Michael kept a vigilant eye on the barometer mounted at the cabin entrance, a precision analog instrument that had belonged to his father. The pressure was dropping slowly, a worrying sign. He checked his chart plotter, verifying his position against digital nautical charts. The GPS showed his precise location, but Michael also kept a physical logbook, noting coordinates, weather conditions, and observations every hour. Technology fails. Paper and pen rarely do. On the second day, as he neared the eastern end of the Beagle Channel, Michael spotted another sailboat returning toward Puerto Williams. It was an ominous sign. Few boats sailed these waters, and seeing one turn back prematurely suggested trouble ahead. Using his VHF radio, he made contact. Resilience calling sailboat ahead. Over. After a moment, a voice crackled through. This is Southern Cross. Receiving you loud and clear. Over. You're returning early. Any trouble out there? Over. There was a pause before the reply. We tried rounding the Horn yesterday, but conditions are deteriorating fast. 30-foot waves and sustained 45-knot winds. Lost our dinghy and part of the lifelines. We're heading back while we can. Strongly recommend you do the same. Over. Michael thanked them for the information and wished them a safe passage. As the other boat passed, he saw the damage. The deck was a mess, and the crew's faces showed exhaustion. One of them, likely the captain, made a warning gesture, pointing to the eastern horizon and shaking his head. This was the moment of truth. Press on or turn back. Michael checked his weather charts and barometer data again. The pressure had dropped another 3 millibars in the last few hours. His window was closing faster than expected. He went below to the cabin and powered up his laptop, accessing the latest weather data he'd downloaded before losing internet signal. The satellite images clearly showed the approaching low pressure system moving faster than anticipated. Forecast models indicated 50-60 knot winds within 36 hours. What would you do, Dad Raspa? He murmured, touching the locket. Deep down, Michael knew what his father would say. Respect the sea. It'll be there tomorrow, next month, next year. There's no shame in turning back when the ocean says, not today. But there was more at stake. It wasn't just a promise to his father, but a promise to himself. After cancer, every day was a gift, every challenge overcome, a reaffirmation of life. Turning back now would mean more than postponing a dream. It would mean giving in to the fear that had haunted him since the diagnosis, the fear that he'd never again be the man he once was. After a moment of contemplation, Michael adjusted his course. He would continue. The resilience was prepared, and he had waited decades for this moment. Some opportunities don't come back. As he left the relative shelter of the Beagle Channel, the Resilience was immediately greeted by rougher seas. The Drake Passage, infamous among sailors, stretched ahead, 650 kilometers of some of the planet's most dangerous waters. Michael could feel the immediate change in the boat's behavior. Here, there was no land to block the relentless winds circling the globe at this latitude. Here, the ocean showed its true nature. He moved efficiently across the deck, adjusting the rig for the new conditions. Michael reefed the mainsail twice, technique that reduces the sails area, making it more manageable in strong winds. Then he swapped the Genoa for a smaller, sturdier storm jib, designed specifically for harsh conditions. The wind was now blowing steadily at 30 knots, and the waves had grown to 12 to 15 feet. The Resilience climbed and descended the choppy seas, but its steel hull and long keel provided stability. Predictable behavior in unpredictable seas, his father always said. That's what you want in an ocean boat. Michael checked the instrument panels. The anemometer showed occasional gusts of 35 knots. The speedometer indicated that even with reduced sails, the Resilience maintained a steady 6-7 knots. The radar swept the horizon continuously, searching for other ships or obstacles, though it was unlikely to find either in these remote waters. As night fell, Michael established a watch pattern: 20 minutes at the helm, 20 minutes checking systems, and making adjustments, 20 minutes resting, but never truly sleeping. The autopilot could take over temporarily in stable conditions, but he didn't trust electronics for critical decisions. Below deck, the Resilience's cabin was a study in efficiency. Everything had its place. Everything was securely stowed. The navigation table, with its charts, parallel rulers, and dividers, occupied one corner. The radio and other communication equipment were mounted above. The small galley had special rails to keep pots and utensils in place, even in rough seas. Michael prepared a simple meal: rehydrated soup, some crackers, a protein bar. Food to sustain the body, not please the palate. He ate quickly, always listening to the boat's sounds, the subtle shifts in motion that might indicate trouble. On the morning of the third day, the satellite communication system failed. Michael tried rebooting the equipment, dismantled the control panel to check for loose connections, and tested the power supply. Nothing worked. He was now completely isolated, with only his short-range VHF radio for emergencies. Not like there's anyone around to talk to anyway, he told himself, forcing a smile. But the loss of communication meant no more weather updates. He'd be sailing blind, relying solely on his experience and the signs the ocean and sky provided. The barometer continued its relentless drop. 998 millibars, 995, 992. Each lower number signaled bigger trouble ahead. Michael studied the sky, reading the signs as his father had taught him. The wispy mare's tail cirrus clouds on the western horizon indicated strong winds approaching. The sky's peculiar blue-gray hue suggested atmospheric instability. The waves, now more irregular in pattern, showed the influence of distant wind systems. By noon, the wind had risen to 40 knots, force 8 on the Beaufort scale, which ranges from 0 calm to 12 hurricane. Michael reduced sail further, now using only a small storm jib on the forestay and a reefed mizzen on the aft mast. Even with so little canvas exposed, the Resilience surged at 7 knots, driven by the wind's brute force. The waves were now regularly hitting 25 feet, some reaching 30. They came mostly from the southwest, but occasionally a cross swell appeared from another direction, the result of complex interactions between the Antarctic Circumpolar Current and the Brazil Current. These ocean currents colliding in the Cape Horn region created particularly dangerous conditions. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the world's most powerful, carries a volume of water 150 times greater than all the Earth's rivers combined. When it meets other currents or underwater banks, it generates unpredictable turbulence and rogue waves. Michael tethered himself tightly to the cockpit with his safety harness. The lifeline, secured to a strong point on the deck, allowed enough movement to operate the boat, but would prevent him from being swept overboard if a wave washed the deck. Falling into the sea in these conditions, even for a moment, would be a death sentence. The water was just 4 degrees Celsius, cold enough to cause debilitating hypothermia in minutes. As the afternoon progressed, the western sky darkened ominously. It wasn't just night approaching, it was the storm Elena had predicted, arriving sooner than expected. "Damn," Michael muttered, studying the approaching wall of clouds. He could see occasional flashes of lightning within the dark mass. "This is going to be interesting." He went below quickly to ensure everything was secure. Loose objects could become lethal projectiles when the boat was slammed. He checked the bilge pumps, working perfectly. Tested the hatches and portholes, all tightly closed and sealed. Back in the cockpit, Michael reduced sail even further, now using just a scrap of the storm jib. The wind had already climbed to 50 knots, howling through the rigging like an angry banshee. The first squall line hit with brutal force. Rain fell horizontally, so dense it reduced visibility to less than 50 meters. The wind jumped to 60 knots, force 11, nearly hurricane strength. The Resilience was lifted by a monstrous wave and then plunged into the trough, a drop of nearly 3 stories. The impact, when it hit the bottom, shook the entire boat, sending a tremors through the steel hull. "Come on, boy!" Michael shouted over the storm's roar. "We've been through worse." It was a lie, and he knew it. He had never faced anything like this. For the next 6 hours, Michael fought to keep the Resilience positioned correctly relative to the waves. The technique called heaving to, balancing, sails and rudder to slow the boat's motion, wasn't an option with such large, irregular seas. Instead, he had to sail actively, keeping the waves at roughly a 30-degree angle off the beam. This technique, known as running with the seas, required constant focus and frequent adjustments. Too far off the wind, and the boat could broach, turn broadside to the waves, risking a capsize. Too close to the wind, and the waves could slam the boat full on from the side, equally dangerous. At midnight, exhausted but unable to leave the helm, Michael heard an alarming crack from the stern. Securing the helm temporarily, he crawled to investigate, his flashlight clenched between his teeth. What he saw made his heart sink. One of the 2 rudder blades had snapped, likely struck by floating debris or damaged by the constant pounding of the waves. The redundant steering system still functioned, but with reduced effectiveness. "Not now," he groaned. "Not when we're so close." Checking his GPS position, Michael calculated that he was approximately 30 nautical miles from Cape Horn. So close, yet so far in these conditions. For a moment, his finger hovered over the EPIR button, the emergency position indicating radio beacon that would alert rescue services to his plight. But activating it would mean the end of the journey and possibly put others in danger to save him. "No," he decided finally. Finishing this. Recalling a technique his father had mentioned in his journal, Michael improvised a system to brace the damaged rudder. Using a combination of spare cables and a section of steel pipe from his repair kit, he created a temporary support that distributed pressure more evenly. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. At least he hoped so. When dawn finally arrived, it brought little relief. The storm had eased slightly, but the waves remained massive, now regularly hitting 40-45 feet, with occasional monsters reaching 50. It was one of these giant waves that nearly ended everything. Coming seemingly out of nowhere, a rogue wave or freak wave, as sailors call them, it rose behind the Resilience like a moving liquid mountain. Michael had just enough time to yell, "My God," before it struck. The wave caught the boat by the stern, lifting it like a toy and shoving it forward in an uncontrolled rush. For a terrifying moment, the Resilience surfed the wave's face, threatening to broach, turn sideways, and possibly capsize. Using all his strength and skill, Michael wrestled the helm, trying to keep the boat aligned with the wave. The Resilience shuddered, resisted, and then, miraculously, straightened as the wave passed. But the relief was short-lived. A second giant wave, even larger than the first, was approaching fast. This time, there was no escaping it. The impact was catastrophic. The Resilience was thrown sideways and then rolled completely. Michael, still tethered by his harness, was dragged underwater as the boat capsized. Icy water flooded his lungs, and for a moment of pure terror he thought, "This is how it ends." But the Mason 44, with its long keel and heavy ballast, did what it was designed to do. After what felt like an eternity but was likely just seconds, the boat completed a 360-degree roll and returned upright. Like a stubborn buoy, refusing to stay submerged, Michael surfaced coughing and choking, still tethered to the cockpit. Salt water streamed from his face, and he could taste blood where he'd bitten his tongue during the capsize. But he was alive, and the Resilience, though battered, still floated. A quick inspection revealed significant damage. The solar panel was gone, as was part of the lifelines. The main hatch was cracked, allowing water into the cabin. Worse, the primary electric bilge pump had failed, likely due to a short circuit from seawater. Using the manual emergency pump, Michael began the grueling task of removing water from the boat's interior. Every movement was agony for his exhausted muscles, but he knew he had no choice. A waterlogged boat was a sinking boat. It was during this desperate struggle that Michael saw it for the first time. Through a brief break in the storm clouds, the dark, towering cliff of Cape Horn appeared, its unmistakable silhouette etched against the tumultuous sky. "We're here," he whispered, a mix of disbelief and exhaustion in his voice. "We actually made it." In that moment, something shifted inside Michael. The fear and exhaustion gave way to a strange, profound calm. He had faced the worst the ocean could throw at him and survived. Cape Horn was there, a silent witness to his ordeal. With renewed determination, Michael finished pumping out the water and made temporary repairs to the damaged hatch. The wind was still blowing at 45 knots and the waves remained dangerous. But compared to what he'd faced during the night, it felt almost manageable. Adjusting his course, he began the circumnavigation of the Cape itself. Traditionally, a sailor must sail completely around the rock to claim the achievement. It was during this circumnavigation that Michael noticed another sailboat in the distance, a larger ketch, likely 60 feet, battling the same conditions. Using his VHF radio, he tried to make contact. "Unknown sailboat near Cape Horn. This is Resilience. Do you read? Over." To his surprise, a response came immediately. "Resilience, this is Southern Light. We're receiving you. You look like you're in trouble. Need assistance?" Over. Michael hesitated. His pride wanted to refuse any help, to complete the journey alone as planned. But the rational part of his brain, the part his father always insisted, must prevail. At sea, knew the Resilience was compromised. The return journey would be as dangerous as the outbound one. "Southern Light, this is Resilience. I've completed my circumnavigation of the Horn but sustained some damage. I'd appreciate company on the return to Puerto Williams. Over. Understood, Resilience. Hold your current course. We'll rendezvous with you in approximately 30 minutes. Over and out." While waiting, Michael opened the small waterproof compartment where he kept his most precious belongings. His father's journal was there, miraculously still dry. On the final page was an entry Michael had never fully understood until now. The true value of rounding the Horn isn't in the achievement itself, but in what you learn about yourself in the process. The ocean doesn't care about your plans or your experience, it simply is, and in that indifference we find our true measure. With trembling hands, Michael opened the locket containing his father's ashes. As he'd promised, he would scatter. A small portion here, at the place his father had dreamed of visiting. "We did it, Dad," he said, letting the wind carry the ashes. "Not the way we planned, but we got here." As the Southern Light approached, Michael saw it was crewed by a middle-aged couple, sea veterans, judging by the confident way they handled their boat in the rough conditions. "You look like you've been through hell," the captain, who introduced himself as Henrik, commented as the boats sailed side by side, keeping a safe distance. Michael laughed, a sound that surprised even himself. "You could say that." "What brought you out here alone?" asked the woman, Ingrid, her voice carrying a slight Scandinavian accent. Michael touched the now empty locket at his chest. "A promise. And maybe something to prove to myself," Henrik nodded, understanding. And did you prove it? Michael looked back at Cape Horn, now receding in the distance. The clouds had parted slightly, and a ray of sunlight illuminated the cliff, making it glow like an ancient sentinel. Not exactly what I expected to prove, he replied finally. I came here thinking I needed to conquer the Horn to honor my father and prove my own strength after the illness, but what I learned was almost the opposite. How so? Ingrid asked. I learned that sometimes real strength is in recognizing your limits, in accepting help when you need it. My father tried to teach me that, but I guess I had to nearly die to really get it. The three boats, the Southern Light, the Resilience, and a third that joined them a few hours later, formed a small convoy for the return to Puerto Williams. The weather improved gradually, though the seas remained rough. During the journey, Michael had time to reflect. He thought about his son, with whom he'd barely spoken since the divorce. He thought about all the messages he'd composed in his mind during his journey, messages he feared he'd never get the chance to send. He thought about the Resilience, the boat that had been his home for so long. The damage was extensive but repairable. The steel hull had held as designed. The redundant systems had worked when needed. The modifications he'd made had proven their worth, but more importantly, he thought about the ocean, that relentless, indifferent force that had tested every fiber of his being. Cape Horn wasn't just a geographical place, it was a state of mind, a test of character, as much as of sailing skill. When they finally sighted the lights of Puerto Williams 3 days later, Michael had made several decisions. First, he would repair the Resilience, but not for more solo adventures. Second, he would call his son as soon as he reached port. Third, he would write about his experience, not as a tale of heroic conquest, but as a lesson in humility and connection. Helena was on the dock when they tied up, her eyes widening at the sight of the Resilience's condition. "You did it," she said. Not a question, but a statement of respect. Michael nodded, stepping carefully onto the dock with legs unsteady after so many days at sea. Yeah, but not alone. Not really. He looked up at the southern night sky, at the stars his father had loved so much, and smiled. Some journeys take us in a circle, back to where we started. Others take us to places we never imagined. His had done both. Cape Horn had exacted its toll in damaged gear, in aching muscles, in moments of pure terror. But it had also given something back, an understanding no book or story could convey. The ocean didn't care if you were rich or poor, experienced or novice, brave or afraid, it simply was. And in that absolute indifference, Michael had found a truth that would change the rest of his life. It wasn't about conquering the Horn, it was about letting the Horn conquer you and being transformed in the process.